that's something that we have to remember, that our price really isn't necessarily what sort of what's real. It's until you find the right price. There's been a lot of different ways that things have been valued over time. So in the beginning, it was always fee for service. In medieval times, the painter was paid for that. It was about skills in the post-Renaissance, and then as we got to the 19th century, it became a little bit more bohemian, and it was a little, the characteristics of the artist. There became some sense of pricing, but before it was almost a fee for service. And now it's much different at this point in terms of being less about genius, you know, like what makes a good painting, about reputation, and especially as we got into social media. And it's also how we price things. We know that people price by square inch or other ways, but these days that may be one of the ways, those kind of scripts along the way. Art itself, what makes art, it's really it's not necessarily unique. This is Tracy Emin, who has this dirty bed. It's called My Bed, and she right now is one of the top artists. It needs to be accessible. You have to figure out a way to put a price on it, and it has to be authentic, and it also has to be accepted. Somebody has to that is acceptable. So these are some of the things that make it art, and that we have to kind of live by, I guess. There is no, yes?
She has a question over here.
Yes, Jill.
Do you want to wait questions till after the end, or?
What, ask your question, and let's see if they get, if I end up, either I'm going to say I don't know, maybe sometimes. So if you're okay with that.
Yes, that last picture was the woman with the unmade bed.
Yeah.
You see a lot of installations and things like that that are art for museums, perhaps, but nobody's gonna buy that, right? So I don't, you know, for me, it's all, I've been a plein air painter, so it's all about gotta sell stuff. So something like that gets a reputation maybe, but then what do you do with it, you know what I mean?
So there are two things. There are collectors who do buy installations, but they may have the, you know, 200,000 square foot homes or whatever that they would put something in, you know, the videos, whatever. There can be a lot of, but
Yeah,
and then the other piece is
they probably already have a bed like this.
yeah, they already have, yeah, and that's it. The other thing that's happening, and I'll talk about this too, is, and it's not necessarily with this one, so you hit it with it is about going to the museum, is really, and it's whatever that theme of that was, but it's probably been, the other thing is, we'll talk a little bit about virtual, that some of these things are being videotaped, they're put in virtual museums. May not be this, but it could be I'll show you the DSL collection that is actually all in Second Life and full and made it so that you can see it in virtual reality or some other way. So art is art, but it's in all different forms these days. There's no intrinsic value in art unless it has gold on it. You know, art itself just doesn't have that. There's no data for art except in auction houses. One of the things that's happened though is that during COVID, when we couldn't see art, all of a sudden art kept coming up in the coming up online. There were more online shows, and all of a sudden prices had to be on art, and that is new. That the what happens is that art has really begun to be a little bit more transparent. The prices are, but usually it was once it left the artist's hands, then we didn't know what happened to the price until it happened to auction. So that's been something that how did that become $1 million painting? There's more art increasing as an asset class. We're seeing things like in our class we had wealth managers who were there who are looking at it as a way to invest. We're seeing a little bit more during, that was starting during the financial crisis. The diversification into tangible assets, so the NFTs. But we just saw in the last week where Ashton Kutcher and his wife, whatever, somebody else, that the judge basically said that they could not do that as a, sort of as a stock option, as an option. But the other thing is, for these big expensive paintings and things, there's fractional ownership. And that's something else that's happening within the art world right now, that people are buying pieces of art. Some of the things that influence the value are really about the artist status. This now is something where as you start winning a prize, or that your name goes into things, on things that people know that, and your status goes, and we'll see ways to do that in terms of getting into galleries and things. The higher it goes, your price can be increased. But also, we have, of course, the sale price of what you sell something for. So a $200 price is also adding status. So if we have a name to it, a celebrity or whoever else, that adds to that. Time is another thing that adds. So over time, that prices rise, and those are things that add to the value. If your art has been selected to be in art fairs, and I don't mean the neighborhood art fairs, but I'm talking about the art expo here in Chicago, or like the Venice Biennale that'll be on for next year. If it goes to auction, it's definitely looking at increasing. And then if it's part of the trends, right now the trend's really looking at artists of color, women, and certainly from geographies, especially right now from Asia and other places. And then if someone dies who's been of some sort of status.
A couple weeks ago, and I don't remember the guy's name, but he kind of contradicted that, and I was going to ask you about the limited supply. He was saying that when somebody dies and their supply is limited, that their price goes down and becomes less valuable. But from what we've learned, I thought that their value goes up or it increases.
Yeah, I would probably think, depending on how high there's probably art was showing what their status is and what their prices were.
And
So
that's to do with their status. If
yeah.
you don't have any status, your price goes down.
It could be, or that depending on, I don't know. That, I mean, I can see it kind of going both ways, but I really do think that if they are of status, that it's going to go up. Okay, so the one thing I just want to talk about value as well is that from the galleries and private collectors, and then these are high economic value, but also symbolic value. And that's the one other thing that we have to think about, that if something gets into a museum, even if it's not at an economic value, it has a higher symbolic level. So when you have an opportunity to get into a museum show, if there's an exhibit or something for those, that gives you a higher sort of, there is a symbolic improvement in the value of it. So just thinking about that, and I'll talk a little bit about all these in a couple minutes, but just the kind of the difference between symbolic value and economic value, but they both increase as you go up. Just talking about artists, there has been quite a bit, and this is data from, there's a Wonder AI, that they decided that, and I kind of like this because at least it broke it out a bit of who artists are. And so we have the star artists, and that's the top 1% of artists, and so living and dead, there's 1% of those that are really, their paintings will always go for that million plus. There are celebrated who also might be, but those are people that haven't quite made it all the way. We have people that are established, and then we have the emerging and underrepresented, that's 84%. And maybe some of you are in here, in these other ones, but I feel like most of the people I know are in this bottom one here, but I think we're still emerging. And, you know, some of us may be in that established as well, so you know where you fit. But I think it's important in a way to kind of just think about this, or know this, that there are different levels and they go into different kinds of galleries and other places. The other thing that seems to be with the artist that's very important is the level of or where they got educated. So one piece of this is around that they are self-taught. And I kind of put in workshops, that's where I would be. Because I have been associated with some of the schools and things, but really I'm self-taught. I was the one that put my curriculum together to figure out which teachers I would have. And then, so that comes into prestigious mentors, could be a part of that. And then there's the sort of lower levels of art schools, and then the highly regarded art schools. So that the academically trained in prestigious schools, those prestigious schools are mainly in large metropolitan areas. London, New York, and Paris, but in particular those places. And then cultivators, which is a term that Jen and the group and I worked with, but they are the people that depend on our art to go, they're the ones that are cultivating the artists and bringing them through the whole system. This is our term, they depend on the graduate schools and the graduate school programs to find the new emerging artists. So that's one of the things that was new to me. I didn't quite understand that, why a community organization may be different when that there are not schools or there are not galleries coming to places like this looking for artists necessarily. It's really because they're, and we interviewed galleries actually around the world during our program, but found that it was very difficult because there's only a few people in the galleries, a few curators who can actually go and look for those new artists. And so they go where they know to go, which is the schools. So that's probably something that, this is the big issue for most of us, that if we didn't go through the school programs, if you did, think about any way you could network with that, because that's still a good credential for you. I just wanted to point out that these are the schools that are sort of, this is from last year, and from US News, EduRank, College Gazette, and Art Research Studies. And the ones in yellow are, so this is School of the Art Institute is American, and so from US News, and the University of Michigan, if we're talking about kind of the Midwest, is one of the other ones. These are all then other ones that we probably can kind of guess at who might be in this. And then the EduRank, Chicago didn't come in here, College Gazette, School of the Art Institute came in ninth, I think. But after Royal College of Art in Paris and Beijing, you know, the School of the Art Institute does very well with this in terms of this area. EduRank, University of Illinois, this is for art research, which I just thought was something interesting to put in here, that University of Illinois was listed in there for art research. But
What does art research mean, Mary?
my guess it's very related to art history.
Oh, okay.
You know, I'm sure it's in that continuum there somewhere.
I think it also relates to like provenance and learning the history of the actual painting and like where it came from and where it originated.
Okay.
Makes sense. Yeah, the idea of what influences value. I don't even know how they define value. Are they like pulling a round of successful artists to know where?
So where almost all data comes from is auction houses. So, and there's just not much information in other places. Now, these may be looking at it from the school standpoint of, you know, I can't speak to that, but in terms of value, the place that the value is being connected is at the auction houses. So these are the organizations that sell at the highest level, and they've been through auction, and those are going to be the auction houses that contribute to that.
Because it's kind of playing with statistics, I think, because, you know, it's, at least a few years ago, the Art Institute was telling the students, I think like less than 5% of their grads earn their living doing art. So even if you went to one of these schools, it's, you know, it's like the superstars might come from them, but barely a foot in the door.
Sure, but that's, so let me go to my next slide here
Okay.
and talk about, this is, I
Could you
didn't
go
get-
back one, so sorry, one more time? We were just taking a picture of your slide. That's okay. Thank you.
If you wanna, I'll tell you what, Dorothy, are you, okay, so,
Good.
I guess I'm fine if you'd
You're
like
fine
that.
with me having them on?
Yeah, not widely, just this group, because they're very special.
They are intellectual
If anyone
property.
wants them, you're gonna have to email me.
They have to be members, folks, so.
You have to be
Yeah.
council members
Okay.
or married to a council
No, you have to
member.
remember.
And you can email me and I'll.
Yes. Thank you.
My understanding is the value is related to the quality of the education. And the art market, what we learn is it's subjective. And it's unregulated, you know, like stocks and all saying that the Art Institute is better based on the US, but doesn't rank at all. So it's very subjective.
It is.
And then, I see that you have the school in Paris.
Mhm.
We call it École des Beaux-Arts. I went there, and anybody can go there. They have to be French. And the great thing is, education is free. So I was there from 72 to 79. And actually, I wasn't completely done with graduating when I moved to Chicago. I had to fly back with some art, some paintings to show to some professors.
Is there an entrance exam though?
Probably nowadays, because it used to be on portfolios
Yeah.
when I was entered the school, but they saw that people were cheating.
Turn
They were
anybody down?
borrowing paintings.
No, people cheat.
French never do.
Well, let me talk about this. Sure. This particular, Anders Peterson was one of our presenters, and I asked them if I could show this, but it came from there's something called Art Tactic, which looks at a lot of the data around art. But this is kind of the value chain for artists, and I had never seen this before, and I thought this was really incredible. So it's the value sort of is the better school, the lower to high, and what adds, but that art school is just kind of at the base, so subjective or not, it is something that begins. It's then the graduate show is the next thing that adds value to each artist. The representation by younger, smaller galleries is the next thing. So what I want you to do is I'm saying, figure out where you can jump in on this. You may not be, maybe you've done some schooling or other kinds of things, but you're gonna be thinking about, you're not gonna think, oh, I didn't go to school, I can't do it. It's more like, where can I take what I have and jump in somewhere? So that's my other thought. You're gonna use as much of this as you can as an artist. The next, so we have this, and I'll talk about galleries, but the first commercial solo show is one of the things. So your review of your solo show. So how many places can you get reviewed? Select to exhibit in a domestic or local art fair. And again, not our local art fairs, but the ones that are being done where there's multiple galleries at them. Local collector interest. So you're finding, if you can find a notable collector who begins to buy your work, one piece, multiple pieces, that's something that can add value to your work. So if you know who your collectors are, that begins to help you know that there could be some advancement. Curator interest and invites to international group exhibitions, nominated for an art prize of some sort. Of international collector interest, that's something that's happening a lot now, is much more international work because people can see it. Artists moved to a more established galleries. So we started with the basics and moved to these established, sort of the tier one, the blue chip galleries. And then acquisition by a major private collector. So that's the next thing. So we have other collectors that are local, that might be big collectors, but And then, moving from there to international museum, solo shows, auction debut, that you would get into an auction. Your work would, not necessarily you, because most auctions are your work is gone, it's been purchased from you and it's secondary. Most times, there are a few now that are not secondary. And then consistent commercial museum exhibition activity, that you have things that are being collected. And strong and consistent auction market activity, so that gets you to that is kind of the top. But, so some of this might feel, I just saw a side, some of this might feel like it's, so, you know, you can see that there may be some places where likely you might kind of, you know, get to or not, but, you know, some of our peers with the Plein Air Painters Chicago have been in museum shows, and you can find that these are the things that you need to be touting and actually working with. Yes?
I'm imagining another line that would influence this line of one's own effective outreach. How much does one's own effective outreach, you know, like what are the steps to that would affect this line? You know, and I'm sure that there's like, you know, a graph that you could do like that, but you have to use something like you know, a modeling software or something like that.
Yeah,
And
so,
it's math I don't understand.
well, I might get to something like that. Not quite, maybe. But let's just talk, now we begin to talk about what is the marketplace. So this is just sort of looking at who are the main pieces. So we know that art school is, you know, we're gonna have the artist right here in the middle. And we know that art school is going to be one of the things that, if you're at a more prestigious art school, that's gonna make a difference. And the press and the critics are going to be one other area that are something that asks me about if I represented art, I don't. But that our agents are people that are part of this, the art advisors who are people that are really watching and looking at artists, and people that, somebody that kind of came up in a community art group. I didn't know too much about those kinds of people, but now have a sense of them, that they are out there and people that might help represent. And then we have, of course, the buyers, sort of the speculators, the art funds. So I was saying there's these fractional art fractional art buying, but art funds that actually do that, almost like a stock, and the collectors. So these are all on one side of the marketplace. And then the part that we mostly think about are the curators. Way that, you know, it works in many different directions here. It's the art marketplace.
Ooh, that's cool, the lines.
Yeah, so what this does is that, you know, the artist doesn't have direct contact usually with this group over here. Maybe with some of the galleries, and the auction houses, but once the first time a piece of art is sold and goes to, or once it goes to a gallery, they may not be touching it again. And that's one of the things we're thinking about. Some of the artists who have sold a lot that we forget. It's others that are making all the money on it. Now, a contract with the buyer that says, for every sale after that, I get X%. That is something, subsequent sale, you know, whether it's 5% or some amount. But those are something that's very common in Europe, and it's something that you may think about, so that you get a piece of it. There are laws about it in some countries. The cultivators, we spent some time we were working on a project on the different people in the art space. They really do, they are looking to cultivate the so looking at gallerists, and often trained as okay, to something that has involved. Okay, all right. So they're trained as curators. The curators that are in the museums usually have a PhD. When you're at the museum, that they will have a PhD. One of the things in the course that Jen and instructor Flavia and she was saying how important the curators write about whatever the collection is, and then kind of used her elbow and pointed it was her, and that was the kind of may be gallerists, you know, they're dealing in art, and they may be agents so that they are selling, but they may not be selling.
Such galleries try to fit in, but I did a different way. We went together to New York. I was looking for a gallery, and I went everywhere, and people said very nice, but you know, well, I only have too many artists. And I led to a gallery, Eric Siegel talk in Soho. He said, "I know your work. I've seen it at the art expo here, and sitting at the time Story Gallery, who was my
And finding somebody who was already familiar with your work. and
also
liked it.
that yes."
And
So,
he
and I'll
talked to
talk
their
about
friends.
that too, that's exactly, you know, getting to know the galleries and knowing how you fit. Part of our project too is a day of people, of artists who want to show their work. And one of the guys that I talked to said, the most frustrating thing is you can tell they never even looked at our website and see that, you know, we only do sculpture, or we only, you know, something, so, you know, it's important to know that, and that's a
Yeah.
very, I'm glad to hear that story. So one of the things now thinking about the pathway, and this is really the pull through, I think that they're pulling pathway, and this is really the pull through, I think that they're pulling you through, pulling us, our art through, but that, one of the things that, the pull is that they're looking at where, you know, so we have this, and then the emerging, there's an awful lot of galleries that we get into around here, that really don't represent. So move through that. They may have shows presenting the artist, so what we're looking for is somebody that's gonna say, yeah, I'll take 2 names, and oh yeah, from now on you can send me as they replacements or whatever. And then we're working through the next level, so where you really get a stronger representation, and then finally to the Goshians and the bigger named galleries that.
What you gave him 2 solo shows.
Solo shows, so that's great, that's, you know, part of the negotiation and also part of what is possible. Then moving to our websites and not photos, and all the different portals, so I'll talk about some of those. The online sales platforms, these are things that are pulling all the way up, that they're seeing all the different works, so when you're actually doing your work and you're using, that you are using these different methods and strategies, and that there's people that are higher up on the chain, that those are pulling you through. These people also want at a higher level. And then the curators are real important. Was there a question? No. Okay, good. And then evaluating art for their people and for their constituents.
How do you, does the artist get where these cultivators will see your work?
So that's a
How do you
little
put
bit.
your position in?
Yeah, so that's a little bit of where this is going at this point. But this is where the artist can push. So, and that can be able to push. But for those of us that are kind of down here, we can, and self-taught and doing the workshops, and maybe some of the other prestigious mentors or in schools, we can get into the group shows, often maybe sponsored, but the group shows, and then get into like the Dragonfly or some of the other kinds of galleries where they just have one after the other show, another exhibit. And then what we're doing is looking to push through those and push into those. So those are the people that, you know, we need each of these groups to see our work and getting in front of them. And so using the websites, and one of the other things are some of the art databases, getting our names in and getting, I'll talk about this too, but getting the group like this to make sure that you're in the databases as well, that Kava is in there, so your exhibit becomes something that's important to the world and also to your members. I'm going to keep trying to get to an answer to you. The other thing is, you need to think about collectors. that there are some different types of collectors out there, and that there may be places in here that you can enter because of who you know. But we have the buyers, art being an emotional purchase, that people that just love something, that's why plein air sometimes hits people. It doesn't have to be a big name artist or anything, it's just, that's where I went to school, or I used to take a picnic, or whatever else it might be. Another piece about collectors as buyers, levels, that buyers like to talk to each other, and what they've been buying. And so it's real important that we are, that who's ever buying our work at these different, even in the exhibitions, that if you know who is buying your work, that
Some galleries don't want to let you know who is buying.
yeah,
Sometimes I have to argue with the dealer to find out who is buying what,
yeah, I've found that too.
because they're afraid they're going to sell it to that collector directly.
And some collectors don't want to be known. Yeah.
Also, that's
Yeah,
true.
yeah. And then the bottom line in a way, in terms of what is of value to them. So we saw these things about value. What I'm finding with the collector that I have, now that she has such a big collection, now she's looking at deaccession and getting rid of some of these things. And that's why we're contacting the auction houses and things. But, and it's interesting that's something that she's tracking, does it? The serious collectors create portfolios. There's a lot of buyers, a lot of art that have it on their walls, and they say, I can't buy another piece, and you have no idea how much they have and haven't tracked it. But they're also buying it for rights, and they're really working to get in to be able to buy more art, because what we've learned too is that galleries won't sell to everybody. They want a certain clientele. They also want that celebrity or whoever else is the buyers, so that galleries can be the gatekeepers. They're also looking at data, and so keeping information. They're looking at the auction houses and others. They want to know what's sold, and they use galleries. The serious collectors use dealers rather. Wealth management is a whole other thing, and it's something that's growing, that there are now banks, Deloitte, USB, Citibanks, all have sections of art wealth managers. We had at least one in our class, we had a couple that were looking at wealth management, buying art for people, and whether it's fractional buying or whole pieces of art. And so there's investor clubs for art now. So you could own a piece of the Mona Lisa or something, but, and then there's fractional ownership. There are art funds, same kind of thing as like a 401k or, something that would go into that. That's probably not a 401k, but maybe a Vanguard fund. Something that I thought was very interesting, that when you see a piece of art that says, at the Art Institute, that says it's from a private collection, it's not unlikely that you will see 2 years from now that it's up for auction.
Oh.
So that one of the things that the Art Institute is doing for them, or any museum, is actually doing advertising. And so it's lending art to museums as a way to increase the visibility of that art. So if these are the big blue chip collectors, they're the ones that are also selling and want it to go to auction, get a big price. So it's now, that piece of art is carrying its credentials. It's been to the Art Institute of Chicago, and therefore has a little bit more value, especially from the boomers who are deaccessioning their collections. From the divorces, the Paley divorce was a big one, the people that own CBS, or were the president of CBS, and then from some of the deaths, and like Prince and other kinds of things that we've seen recently. The other thing is that some of the wealth management, nobody even bought. It's kind of, that happens a lot, but there are free ports where they just don't get They just don't get seen, they're just bought as a, investment.
Could you expand
Yes.
on number 2 right there?
Which one?
Banks and wealth managers?
So think of that, you might have a guy, finance manager, who's helping you with your 401k. This is the same person who now is also trained in art. And they are buying art for you to put in because, you know, we think that buying this Cezanne, when it goes to auction, will be at a bigger cost. So they're actually doing different kinds of, they're using your art as an asset. And Deloitte conferences and bring in all the big collectors and others to talk about the wealth management aspect of this. We've been going now for almost an hour. Do we want 5 minutes? Everybody want to stretch for 5 minutes?
You want 5 minutes? There's wine over here, there's snacks, there's.
Is it another hour or half hour?
I have,
This is
I have
for,
a little ways to go. I have a little ways to go.
Okay.
So if I would just say stretch for 5 minutes because I can see people are, you know, there's a lot of information.
Yeah.
But it's, I have 7:07, come back by 7:15.